Welcome to the Leading Edge Podcast with Eric Thompson.
Inspire, perform, profit.
Hey there, what's going on, everybody? It's your good friend Eric. I hope you are doing fantastic. And welcome to the Leading Edge Podcast. This is episode number 28. I'll start with this. Apparently, you are part of an international audience. I was just looking at my podcast platform. It's called Libsyn, Libsyn. If you've ever thought about doing your own podcast, looking for a place to host the podcast, it's a really user-friendly place to do that. Anyway, I was looking at the stats on Libsyn, and I had no idea, but I was really digging into the stats, and apparently people like literally all over the world are listening to this podcast. So like Spain has had 26 downloads, and New Zealand has had 3, and Australia's had 2, and it's pretty cool to see. I have to assume it's people traveling, right? People who are from the States or from Canada who are traveling to those places on, who knows, their summer vacation, and they're checking out the podcast while they're traveling. Or who knows, maybe we're reaching people far and wide living in those places, but nonetheless, you are part of an international audience, and I am just super grateful that you engage with this podcast, and I enjoy doing this, enjoy releasing a new episode every Friday. This one is called Your First Job. Your First Job, and I'm going to tell you what I mean by that title here in a moment, and I'll tell you that this is related to a common question that I get from owners and managers. So I work with a lot of owners and managers in a coaching relationship, in a mentoring relationship, in a strategic partnership relationship. And I get this question a lot. So they say, hey, when I'm either interviewing staff or interviewing realtors, what are the questions that I should ask in an interview? It seems like that's common. People are always looking for great questions to ask. They kind of want to break out of the norm and kind of the predictable questions and the stereotypical questions. They want to break out of that, and they want to get to some really effective questions so that they can do a better job interviewing, so that they can bring on even better people. I'm going to share with you something that I learned from Dr. Jerry Bell. He is a genius. You should check out the Bell Leadership Institute. They teach lots and lots of really amazing things, and this is something I learned from him. So we're going to get to this title and why I call it Your First Job here in a moment. But one thing I'll tell you, and I learned this from Dr. Bell, and I know this to be true from my experience interviewing, is that most interviews have nothing at all to do with the truth. Okay, nothing at all to do with the truth. Most interviews are a series of rehearsed stories. All right, I'll say that again. Most interviews are a series of rehearsed stories. All right, so I want you to think about interviews that you've been in, whether you've been the interviewer or the interviewee. Can't you imagine and can't you remember all the stories that you had rehearsed heading into that interview? So maybe you are the interviewer. You're going to have a rehearsed story about why your company and why you are like the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? Why this is the most amazing place to work you've ever seen in your whole entire life. And we have no issues at all. And we're just growing by leaps and bounds. And this is like nirvana, and your life will be totally transformed. When you work here, there can be a better place on planet Earth to work. And if you're the interviewee, you rehearse all of your stories so that you come across as the greatest candidate since sliced bread, all right? So I'm the most amazing person on earth. Let me tell you this story about how I just outperformed and excelled and won all these awards and did all these amazing things and helped out my team and contributed to my community. And right, you just rehearse all these stories leading in so that you put yourself in the very best light. What someone I used to work with said, you know what? When people are on an interview, they're on their very best behavior. And sometimes it's hard to get to the bottom of what they're really like. So I'm going to get to these questions that I learned from Dr. Bell. And I'll tell you that even if you're not in a role right now where you are interviewing, these are going to be important to know and also entertaining to know. This is important stuff because you never know. You may find yourself in a position where, one day you are hiring someone, Or maybe you're going to find yourself on the other side of these questions so that now you're even more prepared. But nonetheless, you're going to find these entertaining and I think really, really interesting. So what I learned is that the way to cut through these rehearsed stories, the way to cut through these lies really, and the fact that everyone's on their best behavior is, of course, you want to get to the truth. So you've got to get through the rehearsed stories to get to the truth. And the truth is found in behavior. Okay, so behavior is the truth. The best thing that we could do, the best thing that could happen is we had like surveillance tape of these candidates, of them doing their job and interacting with their colleagues, interacting with clients, right? Getting to watch their actual work ethic. But of course we can't do that. Plus that'd be kind of creepy. But the point is, if we did have surveillance footage of these people, we would be able to see actual real life behavior. So behavior is the truth. So we'd be seeing the truth in these videos, and that would help us to cut through the rehearsed stories. So because we don't have surveillance tape for these people, what you want to do in the interview is you want to ask them lifelines questions. All right. So you want to ask lifelines questions, not predictable questions. All right. So after you've gone through the getting to know you, kind of the breaking the ice phase of an interview, you want to get to lifelines questions. And the beauty of lifelines questions is they cut right to the truth because they're all about behavior. So one of the best lifelines questions you can ask is the title of this podcast. And the question is, hey, can you tell me about your very first job? And the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to watch the candidate get a really funny look on their face. They'll get a kind of a puzzled look on their face, and they're going to say, so you mean like my first real job? Like if they went to college, so my first job that I had when I graduated college, you mean that job? And you say, no. Like your first ever job. Did you have a job when you were young? And what you're going to watch then is they're going to get a smile on their face. Okay, so they're going to get kind of a smirk on their face, a smile on their face as they hearken back to the day that they had their very first job. And I will tell you, number one, you're going to hear some really entertaining, really interesting stories. And I'm going to tell you one that I heard. This is the best version of this answer that I ever received. I'll tell you that in a moment. So number one, you're going to hear some really interesting questions, some really interesting answers, but also you're going to find out a whole lot about their behavior. And you're going to mostly find out about how work was viewed in their household. And so one thing I want you to remember from this podcast is that the research shows if someone is 14 or younger when they have their first job, that means they have a great work ethic. And all that means is that work was expected of them in the household. So anyone that's working at 14 or younger, the reason why they're working at that age is that their parent or grandparent or whoever it was that was raising them expected them to go to work. Okay, it was just an expectation when they were brought up. Hey, when you reach a certain age, you, my friend, are going to go get a job. And that could be, so what are the things I hear? I hear about babysitting and lawn mowing, snow shoveling, things like that people are doing at a really young age. You're hearing about people working in fast food restaurants, so I hear that one a lot. So the first thing you look for, after being entertained by the story, the first thing you look for is how old were they when they got the job? Again, if they're 14 or younger, that means that work was expected in the household, and it means that they're going to have a really great work ethic. On the flip side of that, imagine you're visiting with someone, a candidate, and you say, hey, can you tell me about your first job? And they tell you the story about they were 18 when they had their first job, or maybe, they were 21 or 22. And then you say to them, so there was no other job before that. So you weren't like babysitting or mowing lawns or shoveling walks. And if they say no, that's a red flag. So that means that their parents or again, whoever was raising them never expected them to get after it and to go get to work. I will tell you, for me, I was 14 and I cannot have imagined being like 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 when I had my first job. Like my parents would have like no tolerance for that. Okay. My dad especially, like, that wasn't going to happen. I was expected to go out and work. So during the summertime, when school was out, I was expected to go work and have a job. I was not expected to just kind of lounge around the house doing nothing that would not have flown in my household. One of the very best versions of this is when I interact with people who grew up on a farm, okay? And you may know someone who grew up on a farm. You may be someone who grew up on a farm yourself. And when you ask them, how old were you when you had your first job, they're going to smile and say, I don't know, 5 or 6. I was up milking the cows, or I was up grabbing the eggs, or whatever the work was. I was out, cleaning up the barn, whatever that work was. They were super young when they had those jobs. And isn't it true? Think about someone that grew up on a farm. Isn't it true? They have a world-class work ethic. Those people, they know how to work. They were expected to work. They can't imagine not working. So the thing is, it's really hard to teach work ethic. You need to find people who already have a work ethic embedded inside of them based on the environment that they grew up in. You want them to have come from an environment where work was expected. And you will never have to kick them in the pants to go get to work because they just have that within them already. The second thing you look for when you ask this question, tell me about your first job, is you look for how did they get the job? So if you are interviewing a salesperson, what you want to hear are stories of where they took it upon themselves to go get the job. So here's some answers that I love. I love the story of, I heard someone say, I used to go to this restaurant all the time with my family. And one night I took it upon myself to go visit with the manager. And I asked her if I could have a job there. And she gave me a job as a busboy. Okay. Or you hear jobs of, me and my buddy, we took it upon ourselves one summer to start our own landscaping company. We were 13 years old and we started knocking on doors in our neighborhood and generated our own business. And we had 20 lawns that we mowed, and we had a little landscaping business that we had all the way through high school. That is a great story. I hear similar stories when it comes to shoveling walks. Me and my sister, we started our own snow shoveling business. We go knock on the neighbors' doors and ask them if they want their walk shoveled. I think you get the picture, people who can take it upon themselves, who have the gumption to go out and start something themselves, to go out and get the business themselves from a very young age. They are going to have no problem going and doing those same kinds of things as a realtor. It's like they already know how to do it. It's not a big deal. They have a pattern of doing it. So you want to look for people, especially when you're hiring salespeople, you want to look for people who took it upon themselves to go get the job, as opposed to, I hear this sometimes, they say, I was 22, I was graduating, and I guess it was finally time to get to work. And so my mom, she knew the owner of this company, and she convinced the woman who owned this company to hire me. So that's how I got the job, right? So when you hear stories like that, where a job was gift wrapped for someone and just placed in their lap, easy as you please, with no work involved, that is a ginormous red flag. So you want to look for patterns of behavior that show they were young when they started working and they took it upon themselves to go out and get the job. Okay, so that way you find people who already have it in them to go out and do the things that you want them to do. One of my sayings, and I could probably do a whole podcast on this, one of my sayings when it comes to leading, especially leading salespeople, is you want to hire motivated people and make sure to not demotivate them. All right. So if you want to have a company full of motivated people, just hire motivated people and make sure that you don't demotivate them. And there are lots of things that you could do to demotivate them. But the point is, it's hard to instill motivation inside of someone. They need to have it in the first place. All right. They need to have some fire burning inside of them in the first place. And then what you can do sometime is kind of, stoke those flames, fan those flames, pour some gasoline on those flames. But it's super hard to go start the fire yourself. They need to have that fire burning within them. It's a huge waste of time to try to light a fire inside of someone who has no fire to begin with. So we look for people who have fire. And the way that we find that they have fire is that they have a pattern of behavior where they have taken it upon themselves to go out and get the job. Now, you can also keep going with this question where you could say, okay, so tell me about your next job and tell me about your next job. And you want to look for patterns of advancement. You want to look for patterns of ambition, right? Going out and seeking bigger challenges, seeking bigger jobs. And then other variations of lifelines questions tied to asking about their first, second, third job. You can ask about who's your best ever boss? Who is your worst ever boss? Who is your best ever coach? Who is your worst ever coach? And if you're asking questions like that, you want to hear about people who really motivated them and inspired them and challenged them to do things greater and bigger, to do things that they couldn't believe that they could do. You don't want to hear about great bosses or coaches who were really easy on them or soft on them, that never pushed them. You want to hear about those people in their life that they really appreciate and respected because they challenged them, because that's the way you are going to be too. Now, I'll wrap up this podcast by telling you the very best answer I ever got from this question. By far the most entertaining and also most telling answer I ever received when I asked this question. So I was interviewing a woman to be a realtor in my company. And I said, we're just getting to know each other. And I said, one thing I always like to ask people, if you don't mind, is can you tell me about the first ever job you had? And she had the classic response of, you mean like my first real job out of college? I got a job at an accounting firm. And I said, no, like your first ever job. And she said, you mean my first ever job? Like my first ever work that I did, the first time I ever earned money? I said, yeah, that time. And she got this big, big smile on her face. And she said, okay, I'll tell you that story. She said, so I was in 6th grade and my mom and I took a tour of the Jolly Rancher factory. So all of us have had a Jolly Rancher before, or 1 or 2 or 100 in our life, right? They're the great little hard candies that come in all kinds of flavors. So she toured the factory with her mom. They get to the end of the tour, and in the little shop that's there at the end of the tour, they sell Jolly Ranchers, but what they do is they sell defective Jolly Ranchers. Not defective because of how they taste or what's inside of them at all, but only defective because of how they look. So they sell defective Jolly Ranchers that don't have that perfect, cube, rectangular shape, that really nice 3-dimensional shape. I guess sometimes the factory doesn't produce them perfectly, and so they sell them in that store, and they sell them at a big, big discount, all right? So they sell these defective Jolly Ranchers at a discount, and she said, I said to my mom, how about we buy some of these Jolly Ranchers and I can resell them to my friends? So her mom was very entrepreneurial. Her mom said to her, that's a great idea, sweetie. Let's do that. Let's have some fun with that. So they bought these Jolly Ranchers at a deep, deep discount, and she starts selling these Jolly Ranchers to her friends on the bus. So she's running a little Jolly Rancher business on the side out of the school bus. And everything's going just dandy until, you maybe have already guessed it, until the principal comes calling. So the principal says that she needs to meet with her, so she has to go and see the principal. And the principal, actually I think that the principal was a guy. The principal says to her, look, I hear about this deal where you're selling Jolly Ranchers on the school bus, and I appreciate your entrepreneurialism and your gumption and the fact that you are running this little business. I appreciate all that, but you can't sell Jolly Ranchers on the school bus. It's not really, goes along with our policies, and I think that's going to have to stop. And this woman that I'm interviewing is telling me the story, and she tells me that she says to the principal, tell you what, I'll make you a deal. So her answer wasn't no, or her answer wasn't okay, I'll stop. Her answer was, I'll make you a deal. She said to the principal, I'll tell you what, let me sell them on the school grounds right before the kids get on the bus, and I'll split the profit with you. Meaning that she would split the profit with the school. Because at the time, the school was having this fundraiser to try to raise money for their library, and she offered up half the profit for the library fundraiser. She said, I'll split the profits with you, and you can use that money toward the library because you're trying to raise funds to improve the library. I can help you out with that. Let's split the profit. So the principal's reaction was, deal. He said, all right, you got a deal. Let's do it. And so they start this Jolly Rancher business on school property right before the kids are getting on the school bus, selling defective Jolly Ranchers at a discount, but they're making a profit. The school is getting half the money to go toward the library, and everything's going hunky-dory until the superintendent comes calling, right? You could have guessed it. So superintendent catches wind, and superintendent shuts the whole thing down. And, the superintendent probably wasn't too amused by this whole thing. But, she's telling me this story. Not only am I amused and entertained, but I'm also thinking, my goodness, here's someone who is very entrepreneurial, who has no fear, who knows all about taking things upon herself and taking responsibility, who knows a lot about negotiation, who knows a lot about being creative, who is willing to ask or say anything to someone. Again, it just has no fear at all. And I'm thinking in my head, she is going to make an amazing realtor. And she was brand new to the business. And sure enough, I hired her, and sure enough, she was an amazing realtor and is an amazing realtor. And that stands as the very best version of the answer to the question, tell me about your first ever job. So again, if you're looking for some great interview questions, what you want to do is you want to cut through the rehearsed stories that typically come up in an interview. You want to get to the truth. The way to get to the truth is to find out about behavior. A way to get to behavior is to ask lifelines questions. The best lifelines question is, can you tell me about your first ever job? You're going to find out a whole lot. Were they 14 or younger? Which means that they have a great work ethic. Did they take it upon themselves to go get the job? That means that they are not afraid. It means they think like a business person, like an entrepreneur. It means that they are someone that's going to go out and get after it, which is the kind of person that we like when we hire them. Hey, I hope you liked this podcast, and I appreciate you engaging every single week. If you want more things like this, you got to get signed up for the Leading Edge Inner Circle. Go to jointheleadingedge.com, where you can get way more things like this, way more coaching and insight from me at jointheleadingedge.com. In the meantime, enjoy life on the leading edge. I will see you in the next podcast. Bye.